What Eisenhower warned us about, the military-industrial complex, overtook and trumped his power. And it was during his watch that we lost control of this issue, sadly, to this day. And here's an inconvenient truth. The inconvenient truth is that if you're the President of the United States or the Chairman of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, you're going to be told exactly what they want you to know, if anything. It'll range from nothing to some version of disinformation coded in information so that you do what they want you to do. The name of the game is disinformation and manipulating people. By the time Clinton came along, we'll just skip Papa Bush because he's a mid-level apparatchik in this committee. What Eisenhower warned us about, the military-industrial complex, overtook and trumped his power. And it was during his watch that we lost control of this issue, sadly, to this day. The name of the game is disinformation and manipulating people. Buenas tardes, mi amigos. But you were assessed. The first thing they do with someone like you is a soul biopsy. What is this, a soul biopsy? The medical term biopsy, take a piece. They take a look at your soul, and they want to see if you're a stand-up guy, a good person, and you're not going to go along with a criminal enterprise. They're not going to tell you. Because if they did, they'd have to do to you what they did to Lord Mountbatten, and what they did to John F. Kennedy, and what they did to Bill Colby. They would have killed you. So they protected you by keeping you out of the loop, because you would not go along with that agenda.
Welcome back. I'm talking to Gary Heseltine, and we've been discussing the citizens' hearings which took place in April and May 2013. This is 5 days of hearings.
9 till 5, yeah.
In front of 5 retired...
Six, one former senator and 5 former congressmen and women. Right. Collectively, they had 80 years of public office service. Mm-hmm. But by the end of the week, basically 4 of the 6 of the politicians agreed to sign a mandate that said that there should be a call for full open congressional hearings, but also that they wanted that the United Nations be approached. Mm-hmm. And apparently in 1979, when Grenada had the last debate, there's a motion that's still on the statute book that can be resurrected. Mm-hmm. But what it takes is it'll take a country to make a nomination to resurrect it, to have a debate. Right. So 4 of those 6 called for a UN. So we're hoping perhaps one of maybe the South American countries makes that mandate.
Because if they did, they'd have to do to you what they did to Lord Mountbatten.
Good evening. Welcome to tonight's On the Edge with me, Theo Chalmers. He is author, researcher and filmmaker Richard D. Hall. What a show we've got tonight. Richard, welcome.
Welcome, Theo, and thank you very much for having me back on the show.
Yeah, second time you've been on. Blimey. So you've got a new series.
That's right, yeah.
I think we better start by talking about your new series.
Governments need to acknowledge this phenomenon. I mean, it's only been ever discussed once in the British Parliament properly. That was by the House of Lords in 1979. And I have a transcript of the debate, and it makes absolutely phenomenal readings. There were several of the Lords who were very, very well briefed on UFOs, take it from me. And if you read this debate, 9 out of the 14 Lords that speak, you can tell that they are in favour of a disclosure and of bringing the information out. But it was then just swept under the carpet, and it was never discussed in the British Parliament since 1979.
Because if they did, they'd have to do to you what they did to Lord Mountbatten.
Welcome to Rich Planet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. As usual, the news has been full of bullshit in recent weeks, and here's a few observations. First, let's deal with the horse meat in food scandal. Now, remember in a previous talk I explained that whenever you see the word scandal in the media, replace it with the word psyop, psychological operation, because I would argue that all the high-profile scandals are fake scandals which have been orchestrated from start to finish. Why would they do that, Richard? Well, it's called the Hegelian dialectic. The what? The Hegelian dialectic, or the problem reaction solution psychology. It works like this. They want the public to accept some crazy legislation which the public would not normally accept. This is designed for somebody else's benefit and oppresses the public in some way or other. So they create a fake problem in their tightly controlled media. They then wait for the outrage to spread and get the whole country talking about it. Let's face it, who hasn't heard a horse joke in the last few weeks? Once the problem and outrage has permeated to every conceivable crevice of human consciousness and people are demanding solutions, they then wheel out a solution to their fake problem. Next, the ongoing Jimmy Savile scandal, Jimmy Savile PSYOP, psychological operation, and institutional paedophilia. In previous shows, I have discussed the Savile case with Neil Sanders and Bill Maloney. They were both in agreement that Savile was probably protected from prosecution, but not from his status and work for charity as claimed in mainstream, but because he was probably an asset of the security services. But why? Why might Jimmy Savile have been working for MI5? Well, it's because security services use blackmail traps where they lure important politicians or other persons of influence to have sex with an underage person or child, then secretly film the act in order to get full control of that person. Savile may well have been involved in the luring of people of influence and also in the providing of children. Perhaps you're still not convinced that MI5 would deliberately set up politicians with children to have sex and secretly film them. Recently, the police, who remember are effectively subservient to MI5, have been investigating crimes of alleged paedophilia at Elm Guest House in Barnes, London, which was used by top politicians in the 1980s. Here is a clip from a recent Channel 4 news item about this story, introduced by our friend and potential MI5 asset, Jon Snow.
Two men, aged 66 and 70, have been arrested over allegations of child abuse in southwest London during the 1980s. One is a former worker at a boys' home which was run by Richmond Council in Surrey. The other, a Catholic priest. Operation Fernbridge is looking at claims that senior political figures and others sexually abused boys at the nearby Elm Guest House in Barnes.
Is Channel 4 News and Jon Snow so naive they cannot surmise this guest house may have been set up by MI5? Why doesn't Channel 4 News at least state this as a potential possibility, bearing in mind Ken Livingstone's claims? You don't have to be Albert Einstein to realise that both the police and Channel 4 News are in the pockets of MI5, and that Channel 4 News coverage of this investigation is a joke. By controlling the police and the media simultaneously, MI5 have tried to expose certain people involved in the lower levels of their paedophilia blackmail plots, the footmen, if you will, such as Savile, without exposing the hierarchy controlling them. It's all a mystery to me as to why they have done this. The only reason I can think of is there was pressure from some quarter to deal with some of these footmen of paedophilia, so they decided to sever some of their dead wood, some of it literally dead.
The name of the game is disinformation and manipulating people.
It's all a mystery to me as to why they have done this. Next, the ongoing Jimmy Savile scandal, Jimmy Savile PSYOP. Let's start by stating that many people in high places are UFO believers, or at the very least are open-minded on the subject. In October 2012, Prince Philip instructed his aide, Captain Richard Hutton, to write in response to a Rich Planet viewer. His Royal Highness continues to keep an open mind on the subject of UFOs.
Because if they did, they'd have to do to you what they did to Lord Mountbatten.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here in the National Press Club again. We're at the 12-year anniversary of the Disclosure Project launch here in 2001. And in the intervening 12 years, a lot of water has passed under the bridge. I also wanted to mention that in the run-up to this, I want to just provide an overview of some of the folks that we've been involved with meeting with and providing briefings for over the last 15 years or so. Via the Rockefeller Initiative, which all of you know about now, President Bill Clinton and his wife, First Lady Hillary Clinton, CI Director James Woolsey, Admiral Tom Wilson, the head of Intelligence Joint Chief of Staff, with whom I visited for a couple of hours. It was a 45-minute stand-up briefing that went on for over 2 hours. An astronaut, Edgar Mitchell, was there with me, as well as some other Disclosure Project witnesses. That was in the 90s, before the Disclosure Project was known publicly. Senator Claiborne Pell, those of you who went to college who were poor like me, on Pell Grants, you could have Claiborne Pell to thank. Congressman Dan Burton and many other congressmen who were at the 1997 Disclosure background briefings for Congress. Congressman Dennis Kucinich, General Patrick Hughes, the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, personal long briefing. That's a 2-hour talk about what happened at that meeting. Colonel Canola, the intelligence officer, and Bruce Ashcroft at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base Foreign Aerospace Technology Center, where the Roswell remains were sent. This meeting was ordered by the head of intelligence joint staff, Admiral Kramer, over the objections of the head of intelligence for the Air Force, and he made it happen. I went from the Rockefeller Ranch directly to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And it goes on and on. People like Prince Charles, Prince Hans Anna von Liechtenstein, Lord Hill Norton, 5-star Admiral of the Fleet, Minister of Defense head. I sat with him in his cottage in Hampshire. It's terrible.
Yes, we're being serenaded. 5.
It's kind of tell them not to use that door. I don't want to listen to that terrible rap music or whatever it is. I'd be more concerned about that, and I think that Gordon Crichton, who for years published a Flying Saucer Review, which of course Prince Philip and the royal family subscribed to. I know this for a personal fact. I just know personal fact. He told me, he was military intelligence, British intelligence for years. He said the problem was about the time we started detonating nuclear weapons and going into space, a huge red warning flag went over Earth. Warning. This civilization has reached the nuclear threshold and space, but have not learned to live together in peace. Flying Saucer Review, which of course Prince Philip and the royal family subscribed to. I know this.
It's all a mystery to me as to why they have done this. Next, the ongoing Jimmy Savile scandal. Jimmy Savile psyop.
They were very compassionate. And the same thing, if you study the 1992 landing at Alton Barnes in England, we had, that was before I started training people on these week-long intensives in cosmic consciousness and developing the remote viewing and all this. I just thought everyone could just go out and do this, and they'd show up and everybody would be fine as frog's hair, as we say in the South. Well, they weren't fine as frog's hair. When this event happened, we were at this 1,800-acre estate that we were allowed to use as part of the Royal Trust lands, and this craft appeared in a field just right near where we were, and as we went into this state of we were waiting for it because we had been meditating in the evening, and we had moved. It had gotten rainy. It's a long story. The whole account is in the first book, Extraterrestrial Contact. When this event happened, we were at this 1,800-acre estate that we were allowed to use as part of the Royal Trust lands, and an overview of some of the folks that we've been involved with meeting with and providing briefings for over the last 15 years or so. People like Prince Charles. When this event happened, we were at this 1,800-acre estate that we were allowed to use as part of the Royal Trust lands, and
next, the ongoing Jimmy Savile scandal. Jimmy Savile psyop.
Today he will share with you the framework for making contact and some of the linear and consciousness techniques that the CSETI teams around the world have used so effectively. Let's give a big warm welcome to Dr. Stephen Greer.
Thank you very much.
Okay, well, we got started late, but we're getting started. Welcome, I'm glad you're here. And we're going to have a couple of hours to go through some amazing information. Everybody understand what we're going to do? Okay. So you want to go through, can we dim the lights in here? And what I want to do is go through some of these images. I'd like to play all of this. This is just a collection of some of the material that we've gotten over the years. And it's sort of like a retrospective from last fall all the way through to 1992. Now this is a time lapse, so that you can see the laser is in the field here. But what is this chevron-shaped thing here? So over this valley, we actually saw it. You can see in the picture, everyone's craning their neck. Now this is in Alton Barnes, England, and we're on an 1,800-acre farm that we have had permission to use since '92. We're going to go back there this summer, and on the top of it is this big knoll and hill where you can see the whole area. And this is at the epicenter of where the most incredible crop circles have appeared over the years, and not far from where the Sea-Seti Triangle, that one we showed you earlier. And this is floating right over the valley, very close to us, because this hill is not far away at all. And you see everyone's turned to look. This is another object that appeared right on the edge of the hill. It was a very large spherical craft. It wasn't fully materialized, so it could have been of any shape, but this was the energy signature of it as it was appearing in linear space-time.
What's the location of this?
Alton Barnes, England. Now this is in Alton Barnes, England, and we're on an 1,800-acre farm that we have had permission to use since '92. We're going to go back there this summer. Here, when this event happened, we were at this 1,800-acre estate that we were allowed to use as part of the Royal Trust lands. And
hello, this is Dr. Stephen Greer, and this is Conversations with Dr. Greer on the World Puja Radio Network. And I'd like to thank the folks at the World Puja Network for hosting us here every 2 weeks to bring you information and special guests. And I'm really pleased today to have with me David Wilcock, who has been involved in some of the work we've been doing for many years. He actually came to the Disclosure Project National Press Club event back in 2001, coming up on the 12th year anniversary of that event. And he's going to be here to talk with me about higher concepts and consciousness and transformation and where we're headed as a civilization over the coming years and decades ahead. So thank you, David, for being on the show today.
Well, thank you, Stephen. It's nice to be here.
And that they really were very interested. In fact, they said, would you allow us to have that briefing? I said, of course. I mean, I'm not doing anything secretive at all with this. The same thing I said to the British royal family when they asked for that briefing, which was hand-carried by an actor at a premiere some years ago in London to Prince Charles. So I think what people have to understand is that a lot of the conspiracy theory stuff is wrong because it's painted with a very broad brush.
Mr. Bassett.
Thank you. I'm Stephen Bassett, and I'm a political activist. One of those people that if they're right, you hate them, and if they're wrong, you hate them. Right? All the time. That's the first point. The second point has to do with the Rockefeller Initiative. I invite all of the political media, all media in general, but certainly the political media, to look at the Rockefeller Initiative. It is one of the great stories in American history. It's one of the great political stories, certainly of this or any other time. It is filled with amazing people who are still around and still very powerful. At the time that Rockefeller approached, through his attorney, President Clinton, Clinton's one of his very key advisors was John Podesta. The chief of staff at the time was Leon Panetta. The wife of the president at the time was Hillary Clinton. A good friend of the family at the time, soon to be Clinton's Secretary of Energy, was Bill Richardson. And this event went on, or this initiative went on for 6 years. The press completely ignored it, as if, what's the news there? It's just a billionaire Rockefeller trying to get the president to release all the files on this phenomena. possibly put a letter into every newspaper in the country and release, and basically, and the truth embargo. There's no news there. In the 20 years that's followed, what has happened? Well, Leon Panetta, the chief of staff, who was fully aware of the Rockefeller Initiative the entire time it went on, became the Secretary of Defense and then the CIA director under President Obama. The wife of the president, Hillary Clinton, who was fully aware of the Rockefeller Initiative, went on to become Secretary of State and almost the President of the United States. John Podesta went on to become his chief of staff, and then in 2002, in a room just on the other hall I was attending, is when he made the announcement that Grant Cameron talked about, calling for the release of all the UFO files out of nowhere. I was there to watch the launch of the Coalition of Freedom of Information, which was kind of a mainstream attempt to look at this issue. I knew it was mainstream, and so when he showed up, I wasn't too surprised. But then when he made that statement, I said, what is going on here? A former chief of staff of a president and an advisor to a president has just called for the release of all files because the people have the right to know, and it's the law? And I said, well, there'll be 1,000 press trucks in front of his house tomorrow. Didn't happen. A year later, he came back and said it again, 2003. And then 6 months after he did that is when Bill Richardson wrote a foreword to a book called the Roswell Dig Diaries, where he basically said the Air Force explanation for Roswell was incorrect. Right? About the same time as when Stephen Schiff was doing his efforts to try to find out the truth, and Colonel Philip Corso came forward with extraordinary revelations about his involvement with the Roswell technology. And the press still didn't see the news quite yet. President Obama appointed Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State, but what was the most notable thing to me is one of the most important jobs that he had to choose as the new President of the United States was the person that was going to help form the new government that he was about to launch. And the person he chose as the co-chair, but the principal chair of his transition committee, was the man who called for the release of all the UFO files in 2000 and 2003, John Podesta. But when they lost the election in 2004, went silent. And I can tell you, there is an unbelievable political story that has never been told that exists between the moment that Rockefeller turns up in Clinton's Office of Science and Technology Policy and the election of Barack Obama and the selection of all the people that knew about the Rockefeller Initiative right into the administration, including Bill Richardson, who they tried to make the Secretary of Commerce. These connections are too extraordinary to be accidental. I believe that the story the press could find, which is just dripping with Pulitzer Prizes, is the fact that the Democratic Party at some level made the decision that they were going to be the disclosure party. It should have gone to George H.W. Bush, the perfect, quote, disclosure president from the standpoint of the military intelligence complex. But the Cold War ended in the middle of his term. There was a war in the Middle East. It wasn't quite something you could just do, but he was the guy. He has a resume. It looks like a phone book. But he lost the election. He lost the election to an unknown man from Arkansas with a rather unusual history. And I would also say that the day that Rockefeller's attorney showed up in the office of this man that the military intelligence complex wanted nothing to do with, the alarm bells were going off all over the military intelligence world, in the basements and the darkest recesses of the underground facilities. Oh my God, Bill Clinton is going to be the disclosure president. And very shortly after Henry Diamond appeared and the Rockefeller Initiative began, and I remember it quite well because I was living in Washington, it seemed like the entire universe collapsed down on this administration, and they came under every conceivable attack you can imagine from every direction. They went after mothers, dogs, cats, girlfriends, aunts, uncles, Travelgate, Troopergate, Porkbellygate, and it never stopped until he was impeached. The alarm bells were going off all over the military intelligence world, in the basements and the darkest recesses of the underground facilities. Oh my God, Bill Clinton is going to be the disclosure president.
It's all a mystery to me as to why they have done this. Next, the ongoing Jimmy Savile scandal. Jimmy Savile PSYOP.
The same thing I said to the British royal family when they asked for that briefing, which was hand carried by an actor at a premiere some years ago in London to Prince Charles. So I think what people have to understand is that a lot of the conspiracy theory stuff is wrong because it's painted with a very broad brush.
Lady Diana Spencer was plucked from the obscure ranks of the British aristocracy and became a fairy tale princess. Then suddenly, in August 1997, Diana's life came to an end. The world stood still as news of Diana's car crash reverberated around the world's media. But what the official history books will not tell you is that on the very day of that fateful crash in Paris, rumours circulated that Diana had been assassinated by British military intelligence or the American CIA.
Because if they did, they'd have to do to you what they did to Lord Mountbatten.
The name of the game is disinformation and manipulating people.
And how Diana had to search her apartment in Kensington Palace for listening devices placed by MI5, who then distributed secretly taped and edited private phone conversations to the media in order to discredit Diana's public image. For the first time, we reveal details of the bungled attempt by MI5 to murder Camilla Parker Bowles just weeks before Diana's car crash in Paris. The public were informed in more detail about her marriage to Andrew Parker Bowles and the longevity of the relationship, the loving relationship that Camilla Parker Bowles had had with Prince Charles. And it's very, very sad because Camilla Parker Bowles, shortly before the car crash in Paris that killed Princess Diana, shortly before then, Camilla Parker Bowles was herself involved in a traffic accident in the West Country, near a house in Wiltshire, in England. And it's still an interesting thing. We must cover that in this film, because the car collided and Camilla Parker Bowles fled the scene. Now, there is a law in most countries in Europe that if you're involved in a car accident and there's another person who's been injured, you mustn't leave the scene. You mustn't. You have every responsibility to stay at the scene, call the emergency services if you can. And she fled and she ran into the woods. And I've heard rumours, I don't know whether this is speculation or whatever, but there were rumours that she'd fled into the woods because she felt that she might have been killed, and that possibly that the car crash was actually an orchestrated event
and that they really were very interested. In fact, they said, "Would you allow us to have that briefing?" I said, "Of course. I mean, I'm not doing anything secretive at all with this." The same thing I said to the British royal family when they asked for that briefing, which was hand carried by an actor at a premiere some years ago in London to Prince Charles. So I think what people have to understand is that a lot of the conspiracy theory stuff is wrong because it's painted with a very broad brush.
Now this is in Alton Barnes, England, and we're on an 1,800-acre farm that we have had permission to use since '92. We're going to go back there this summer.
When this event happened, we were at this 1,800-acre estate that we were allowed to use as part of the Royal Trust lands, and
the alarm bells were going off all over the military intelligence world, in the basements and the darkest recesses of the underground facilities. Oh my God! Bill Clinton is going to be the disclosure president.
Next, the ongoing Jimmy Savile scandal. Jimmy Savile PSYOP. It's all a mystery to me as to why they have done this.
Open battle raging between Sabbatean cabal and military-industrial complex. Posted by Benjamin. June 11th, 2013. The recent cabal-controlled corporate media frenzy of disclosure about things like NSA eavesdropping, politically targeted IRS tax investigations and the Bilderberg meeting are signs of full-blown panic. There was also unprecedented publicity given to controlled opposition forces like Alex Jones and David Icke. Jones, for example, was widely promoted in Zionist outlets like the Drudge Report, BBC etc. in what appeared to be an orchestrated campaign. Jones is linked to the Zionist liquor smuggling Bronfman gangster family. David Icke, for his part, has been linked to the Rockefeller crime family. What both these controlled opposition figures have in common is that they take true conspiracy information, like the fact that central banks are privately owned monopolies, and then, in a bait-and-switch maneuver, ultimately put the blame on aliens without providing any credible evidence for this claim.
The Windsors are not, like these Illuminati bloodlines in general, are not the same DNA as the rest of the global population. They need an infusion of human genetics to hold the balance of their DNA between the human and what they really are, which is actually not human as we understand human. I mean, it's no accident that the Queen's, present Queen's grandmother is a direct descendant from the sister of Vlad Dracul, on whom the Dracula stories are named. Based. So Diana knew this, and then I come across people like an American lady, Arizona Wilder, who again was involved in a victim of this mind control project and was used to conduct rituals for them. Under a mind controlled state, they are mind controlled to conduct these rituals in a certain way.
And these were taking place on royal properties in Scotland?
Yes, exactly, in Balmoral, and there's a particular place in Belgium which is known as the Mothers of Darkness Castle, which is funnily located in the same area that child murder and satanic ring was based, that came to light, clearly involving the establishment figures of Belgium, and was a massive cover-up. When a real investigator, a prosecutor, got involved, of course, they had to get rid of him, and 300,000 Belgians went on the march one day in protest at the cover-up. Well, all these things interconnect, and she told me that she and another two of such people have told me the same story, that she was actually in Britain at rituals at which Diana was being abused in part of these rituals in a mind-controlled state, because there's no question whatsoever that when you talk to the people I've talked to, that Princess Diana was one of the victims of mind control.
And then, in a bait-and-switch maneuver, ultimately put the blame on aliens without providing any credible evidence for this claim.
The Windsors are not, like these Illuminati bloodlines in general, are not the same DNA as the rest of the global population. They need an infusion of human genetics to hold the balance of their DNA between the human and what they really are, which is actually not human as we understand human.
And according to the book by Andrew Morton, Diana used to suffer from bulimia. And bulimia is a very, very serious disorder, as is anorexia. And all credit to Diana, she actually publicly admitted that via the Andrew Morton book, and she fought through it, and she started on a regime of exercise. At the time when she was murdered, she was really very, very physically fit. And she used to visit the gym every day, and she worked her way through this disorder, and she worked her way through the ostracization that she suffered at the hands of the royal family. If we consider all of these pressures that were on Diana, we can see that she was somehow caught in a marriage which was a marriage without love between her and Charles. She was in a marriage where Charles's parents considered her as somebody that was maybe perhaps losing it.
Welcome, Barry Trower, to White TV.
Thank you.
It's a very big honor for us that you take your time and give us an interview.
Yes, I started in 1960. I studied microwave, all aspects of microwave warfare with the military.
In Great Britain?
In Great Britain, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. All aspects of microwave warfare. I learned about the dangers, how they can affect the human body, as well as, of course, radar and military uses of that. And a small part of my work after, for 11 years, was because microwaves during the Cold War were used as they are today as stealth weapons. They are perfect weapons because people do not know they are being targeted. And any government can and has targeted individuals, groups of people, streets, whole streets of people. You can target people with low level over 18 months, 2.5 years, and you can cause serious neurological damage, serious physical damage, and of course cancers.
And change the mind.
Easily change the mind. So I did this for 11 years. I mean, I knew then about 30 pulse frequencies. Now they have a list of about 600.
Mentally. And rumours were circulating that Diana was mentally unstable.
And change the mind.
Easily change the mind.
I'm supposed to be dragged off in a minute with men in white coats, so if it's all right with you, I thought I might postpone my nervous breakdown to a more appropriate moment.
And change the mind.
Easily change the mind.
It's all a mystery to me as to why they have done this. Next, the ongoing Jimmy Savile scandal. Jimmy Savile PSYOP.
There's a facility in Australia. There's a group of physicists I know who work there, and there are these things that look like grays and others coming off a conveyor belt. And they have integrated circuits in their neural complex, and they're put on board these ARVs that look like UFOs, and they use electromagnetic weapon systems and chemicals, and they abduct people. That's what happened to Paris de Cuellar. So and then they have implants. Now the implants, if you look at the implants that are being made, EG&G and a group of other high-tech electronic firms, E-Systems, have been making these in Siemens for decades. If you look at the tape we just released posthumously from a guy named Pollock, disclosureproject.org, top secret guy. He had worked with a man who developed back in the 70s some of the implants that they began to mass produce. Siemens made about 2 billion of them at the time. And these are implants that are RF frequency, radio frequency, and they both connect to satellites, but they can receive signals. And they can affect on a scalar level of what are called psychotronic and radionic type of effects.
And change the mind.
Easily change the mind.
Charles's parents considered her as somebody that was maybe perhaps losing it mentally. And rumours were circulating that Diana was mentally unstable.
Welcome to Rich Planet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. In August last year, 2012, I interviewed UFO researcher John Hanson, and we discussed a very intriguing object which came out of a lady's nose in the 1990s. John still has the object. Today I will be re-screening this interview because earlier this year I met and interviewed the lady whose nose the object came from. That follows in parts 2 and 3 of today's show. I'm joined by Ellie today, who I found out about from John Hanson. John Hanson, the UFO researcher. Now, we've already covered a little bit of Ellie's story, in particular when this thing came out of your nose in the mid-1990s.
That's correct.
An object which was examined by a professor at Manchester University under an electron microscope, and they didn't know what it was, and it has some extremely fascinating features on it for me. Now, you are someone who has had UFO experiences for a lot of years prior to that and after that incident. So we're going to talk about some of those incidents today, and Ellie's very kindly agreed to be interviewed. There you can just see it falling down there.
Fragment.
So it's a tiny fragment, and as I say, there we go. Let's just see if I can shake it up. Let's see it again. Right.
And coming back from that holiday is when the problem started, where I had people interfering with my mail, I had telephone lines down, my internet, which I was getting used to, and I was getting very frustrated because it was getting cut off.
Right.
And strange people outside schools, which I've later found out, one of which was, the vehicle was actually registered to the Ministry of Defence.
So one of these vehicles was,
I don't know
managed
why.
to get it was traced to being MOD, MOD intelligence.
And that was it. But then prior, just after that is when I had a really, really strange dream. My husband and I were going through a difficult time in our marriage, and we were in bed one night, and normal night as far as I'm concerned. But at some point in the night, I woke up and I was in the back garden.
Right.
Of the house I lived in Southall, and it was cold. It was sort of probably sub-zero temperatures that particular night, and I was standing looking in the garden at something up in the sky, which just was hovering. It was huge. It must have been the size of a football pitch, if not bigger, and it blanked out the sky.
Can you remember the shape of this object?
It was triangular.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, it was definitely triangular, because I was at the back end of the pointed bit of this triangular shape was out of sight. It was that big.
Right. Okay.
And like I said, there was no stars. And once I realised what I was looking at, I woke up and I was back in bed, but I was freezing cold.
Right. Okay.
And I'm trying to wake my husband.
Right.
And I couldn't wake him up.
You couldn't wake him up, okay.
The name of the game is disinformation and manipulating people.
And these are implants that are RF frequency, radio frequency, and they both connect to satellites, but they can receive signals. And they can affect on a scalar level of what are called psychotronic and radionic type of effects.
It's all a mystery to me as to why they have done this. Next, the ongoing Jimmy Savile scandal. Jimmy Savile psyop.
It gets better.
Oh yeah.
It gets better.
Don't hear.
Soon after that incident where, my husband said, I can't, we can't share the same bed, this is ridiculous. Right. I've got to go to work in the morning, you're keeping me awake because you keep waking up, in a panic. Mm-hmm. So for a few nights after that, he went and slept in the spare room.
Yeah.
And I had another dream where I woke up and this thing was on the bed, striding me. It was standing there, it was horrible.
Right.
It was like leathery looking.
Right.
I can't describe it except it had like a horn on its back.
Right, okay.
And it sort of had its, I suppose you could call it arms, on its hip area, and it was just standing there looking at me, and I'm sort of laying between its legs.
Right, okay.
And again, I sat bolt upright in bed, nothing there.
Right.
And then it must have been a matter of days later, I was back down the doctors because I'd been to work, and I'd said to them, I really don't feel well. I've got to go home. I said, I've got to get my clothes off because my skin down below is very, very uncomfortable. I've just got to get my clothes off. And I went home and I had a look down below and all the insides of my legs were bright scarlet. Anyway, after sort of sitting in the bath and soaking, my mum came over and she said, I really do think you need to see the doctor about this.
So was this immediately after you'd had this
vision? This was a couple of days after this thing, standing in the middle of the bed.
Okay.
And they can affect on a scalar level of what are called psychotronic and radionic type of effects.
According to the fragments that Mr. Trevor Rees-Jones has remembered, there wasn't excessive speeding, and there wasn't certainly a drunken driver at the wheel. But there is some interesting things that have come forward since this whole tragic event happened regarding what Mr. Henri Paul used to do to earn a bit of extra cash.
Well, there's certainly plenty of evidence now to suggest that Henri Paul was an asset of both British and French intelligence. We know he was working for the DST, which is the French internal intelligence equivalent in many respects to Britain's MI5, because he had DST phone contact numbers in his address book. They found those after his death. So we know he was working for French intelligence, but the evidence seems to suggest he was working for British intelligence as well. Richard Tomlinson has stated he's seen files with he thinks was Henri Paul's name,
yes,
working for MI6. And
hello, LA. How are you? All right. So this little exercise in democracy launched the worldwide disclosure movement. Now, at that time, I had a lot of documents and information, but they were maybe a dozen of these top secret military guys. Now we have 550 of them. If you go to disclosureproject.org, you'll see we just released the testimony of a man named Halleck who actually had the information on these implants that were being designed decades ago and put in people. Everyone thinks that they're alien implants. I said, oh no, EG&G and Siemens have been manufacturing those for decades. I know the people who designed them. And they're RF frequencies that go to satellites in space. And they're two-way because they not only monitor, but they also control. We get into this if you want to hear it. It's not a pretty story.
Military and government and consulting careers.
Okay.
In sort of a resume sort of way, just so we have a sense.
Okay, my name is William John Pollock, and I'm 56 years old. My background initially started in the Air Force in the mid-60s, where I was a computer operations and programming specialist for first at Pope Air Force Base after training, and then in Vietnam.
Do you think this is just restricted to the U.S., or do you see that it has international scope?
Oh, I would say this is international in scope. The projects that we have are closely tied in with other allies governments. In fact, I had been told back in the late 70s on one of the early classified projects I worked on, once I got my security clearance back, was that there is a secret agreement between us and the Brits, that whatever we invent, they get. Whatever they invent, we get. And there is no limitation as to what it is. If our boomers look like whatever they look like, the Brits can make them duplicates. And we don't hold back on any of the technology because of that secret agreement that was cut during World War II. And we have other allies like that.
We also exclusively reveal that the black Mercedes carrying Princess Diana had previously been stolen at gunpoint, and that the engine management microchip had been replaced so that the car could be controlled remotely. We also interview the authors of a new book, Diana, the Hidden Evidence, which reveals that MI5 and MI6 officers had advance warning of the crash which killed Princess Diana, her companion Dodi Al-Fayed, and the driver Henri Paul.
And somebody needs to look into the influence that certain British commando units have and their cross-pollination with other groups like them in the United States.
Because if they did, they'd have to do to you what they did to Lord Mountbatten.
It's all a mystery to me as to why they have done this. Next, the ongoing Jimmy Savile scandal. Jimmy Savile psyop.
When you wrote your book with John Beveridge, you actually did some research and discovered that certain techniques exist for assassinating people. And in recent years, I think you say in your book that in, say, the last 20 years, it's sort of become kind of the in way of killing somebody is by organising a car accident.
Yeah, well, we wanted to look into that because obviously if this was an assassination, then we thought, like everybody else probably to begin with, at the very beginning, that this was a bit of a chancy way to assassinate somebody. You know, I mean, put a bullet through their head, they're dead. Car crash, they could possibly survive. And so we looked into that and see if we could find any other instances, and we found several instances. I suppose the most high-profile instance we found of another assassination by road traffic accident was an incident reported by Sir Ranulph Fiennes. Now, Sir Ranulph Fiennes is a personal friend of Prince Charles. He's the world-famous explorer, but he's also a former SAS officer. And he revealed that in a book he wrote a long time ago, that back in as long ago as 1986, he reported an incident of an assassination by a road traffic accident. And he reported or revealed that this technique is known as the Boston Breaks because it was developed by the SAS in Boston in northern England, where the SAS is based. And it effectively involves inserting a little microchip transceiver that overrides the steering and the brakes, and so that the car can be remotely controlled. Now, I know this sounds all a little bit James Bond at first hearing, but just, you know, we can fly probes to Mars and back by remote control. We fly, you know, highly sophisticated spy planes at 60,000 feet without pilots, you know, by remote control. We can certainly take over a car with the right equipment and drive that car remotely. And all the evidence seems to suggest that that's what happened that night.
Now, if I can just point out then, because Sir Ranulph Fiennes has written many books and he's a quite a well-known ex-military character.
Yes, he is.
Are you saying that Sir Ranulph Fiennes, he used to work for the SAS?
He was a SAS officer, yeah.
He is an acquaintance of Prince Charles.
He is indeed.
and that the organisation that Serrano finds used to work for, the SAS, in the past have developed this technique of remotely controlling a car in order to create a car accident that could kill someone.
Absolutely right, yeah.
Now, this gentleman, this is also covered in your book. I find this very interesting. This is Air Marshal Sir Peter Horsley, former equerry to the Queen.
Yeah.
He's now dead.
He is now dead, yeah.
Now, Air Marshal Sir Peter Horsley confirmed that the Boston Breaks method of assassination has been used in Britain, and that he was personally, though unwittingly, involved in an operation that used this so-called Boston Breaks technique.
That's right.
What on earth happened there?
Well, it was the car that Sir Peter Horsley was driving.
Mm-hmm.
This is all according to Sir Peter Horsley. People can buy his book and read this for themselves.
His book's called
Sounds from Another Room, yeah. And he was driving his car along the A303 in England, close to Stonehenge, when he noticed a Volvo estate closing on him in his rearview mirror very, very quickly. So he kind of moved over to allow this car to overtake him, but as it overtook him, he noticed his car, he completely lost control of his car, and he felt that it was taken over completely. Mm-hmm. The next thing he knows, he's swerving one way, then another way, back violently across the central reservation, smack into what was obviously the target vehicle, which was driven by a character called Major Michael Marmon, who was the target. And Michael Marmon was killed in this accident. Sir Peter Horsley was very seriously injured, but he survived. But what's also interesting about that particular incident, Chris, is that it's the way in which Sir Peter Horsley's car moved when it was taken over,
yes.
Because it is identical to what happened to the Mercedes in which Diana died, in that the minute Sir Peter Horsley lost control, the minute Omri Paul lost control, exactly the same thing happened. The car swerved first one way, then the other way, and then back, in Omri Paul's case, into the 13th pillar in that Almont underpass.
Yes.
In Sir Peter Horsley's case, across the central reservation and into the target car.
And there are RF frequencies that go to satellites in space. And they're two-way because they not only monitor, but they also control. We get into this if you want to hear it. It's not a pretty story.
But if you watch computer-generated reconstructions of the crash, certainly Diana's crash, you see specific movement of that car. It's not just taken over and then suddenly it's driven into the pillar. It moves in a very specific way, and it is identical to the way in which Sir Peter Horsley's car was manoeuvred once it was taken over.
This thing was on the bed, striding me. It was standing there. It was horrible.
Right.
It was like leathery looking.
Right.
I can't describe it except it had like a horn on its back.
And they can affect on a scalar level of what are called psychotronic and radionic type of effects.
This thing was on the bed, striding me. It was standing there. It was horrible.
Right.
It was like leathery looking.
Right.
I can't describe it except it had like a horn on its back.
And it is identical to the way in which Sir Peter Horsley's car was manoeuvred.
What was amusing to me a few months ago on a website that likes to collect articles on the unusual is that a lady out east had a chip removed from her body in 1999. They had it blown up on the website. And it was a slight modification of this chip from Denver with some of its enhancements. And it was put in her, she believes, in either 1980 or 1981.
Do you think that Diana, in really going against the military-industrial complex, as it's known in America, would provide a motive strong enough for certain people to try and kill her, to stop her from continuing this landmine campaign?
I think certainly, yeah. I think that certainly a motive enough to involve, say for example, the CIA in what I believe was already an MI6 plot to kill her.
And Somebody needs to look into the influence that certain British commando units have and their cross-pollination with other groups like them in the United States.
And what next? What next? If she could persuade the President of the United States to, defy the American defense industry, then what else, what else was she capable of? So, yeah, I think that was enough to interest the CIA. Because the note that Diana wrote, everyone assumed at the time when that note was published that she was referring to Camilla when she said that her husband was planning an accident in her car in order to make the path clear for him to marry. Everyone put Camilla on the end of that note in their minds. But actually the woman Diana was referring to was Tiggy Leg Bork. And Diana was, this is in this note and in the note she lodged with her lawyer, Tiggy Leg Bork is named.
And changed the mind.
Easily changed the mind. So I did this for 11 years. I mean, I knew then about 30 pulse frequencies. Now they have a list of about 600.
And Diana's fear was that both herself and Camilla were on the government hit list in order to make the path clear for Charles to marry Tiggy Leg Bork.
And changed the mind.
Easily changed the mind.
Now, just one small instance there that is very interesting is, 10 years ago now, I was told very specifically that there had been an assassination attempt on Camilla Parker Bowles. And interestingly enough, that assassination attempt had taken the form of a road traffic accident. Camilla had survived a near-fatal car crash just about 6 weeks before Diana's own car crash claimed her life. So there's something in what Diana was fearing there. There's more to this note that meets the eye immediately, even though it's very interesting anyway. But there's more to it even than that. I've spoken to a lot of sources during my investigation, and my initial sources, my initial MI5 source and another source I was introduced to by that person, told me very clearly that Diana's death was the result of the failure to assassinate Camilla Parker Bowles.
Of some of the folks that we've been involved with meeting with and providing briefings for over the last 15 years or so, people like Prince Charles.
When this event happened, we were at this 1,800-acre estate that we were allowed to use as part of the Royal Trust lands, and
the West Country, near a house in Wiltshire, in England.
Now this is in Alton Barnes, England, and we're on an 1,800-acre farm that we have had permission to use since '92. We're going to go back there this summer.
She did have a close relationship with Barry Manicky, who was a personal protection officer. And I know that an American television company made a documentary claiming that Diana and Barry Manicky had more than just a close friendship, that they actually had an affair. Shortly after this broadcast, which I believe was broadcast in America, Barry Manicky was killed in a car accident.
Because if they did, they'd have to do to you what they did to Lord Mountbatten.
And it is identical to the way in which Sir Peter Horsley's car was manoeuvred once it was taken over.
It's now transpired that people that Diana presumably considered as being very, very close friends have very, very strong connections to MI5 and MI6. One of those people is Rosa Monckton. Can you tell us about Rosa Monckton?
Well, she's a very interesting character, Rosa Monckton. Yeah, I mean, she kind of somehow became Diana's, probably her most, certainly publicly speaking, her closest confidant.
And a friend of mine in San Francisco, who I had quietly told about this technology, because he was involved with other aspects of national security and tracking people, he got a project to do a physical security system. Access control, cameras, intrusion monitoring, everything, the works, for a little company in Silicon Valley. And he said it was eerie to him, but what they were making there looked eerily like what I had described to him. He built the security system in this modern fab, building billions of these little chips. He wound up a year later being asked if he'd want to buy the security system back. They were shutting the factory down after they'd made billions and billions of these little chips. And it was a division of a rather major European electronics firm that had the plant.
Which one?
Siemens. And what concerned me was that they had built these chips, and who knows what happened to them. And they built them in the billions in volume, because they're so small that you can take a 6-inch wafer and make hundreds of thousands of them on a wafer. And they disappeared somewhere. Is that a lady out east had a chip removed from her body in 1999. And they had it blown up on the website. And it was a slight modification of this chip from Denver with some of its enhancements. And it was put in her, she believes, in either 1980 or 1981.
Well, Diana's about 4 or 5 years older than I am, and I was still at school in 1981 when the engagement was announced.
And it was put in her, she believes, in either 1980 or 1981.
In 1981, when the engagement was announced.
And it was put in her, she believes, in either 1980 or 1981.
You know, in the public eye, and I think she did get very close to her. But what's interesting with regard to her connections to the intelligence community is that, well, the Monktons really are pretty much a British spy family. That's pretty well known. Rosa's grandfather was pretty much a government agent. He was advisor and confidant to Edward VIII during the abdication crisis, keeping an eye on the errant king.
The name of the game is disinformation and manipulating people.
There are a few things really, but I guess most notably is the fact that this Mercedes was stolen prior to the accident. Now,
do you know how
it was stolen? Yeah, well, it was stolen by an armed gang of 3, at gunpoint, which is, perhaps if you're in the trade of buying and selling stolen cars, then a Mercedes S280 is worth stealing. But this car was found a few days later with nothing missing, nothing wrong with it except the little microchip, effectively the car's computer that certainly controls the car's steering and brakes.
The name of the game is disinformation and manipulating people.
It's all a mystery to me as to why they have done this. Next, the ongoing Jimmy Savile scandal. Jimmy Savile PSYOP.
So we had 4 occupants. You had Henri Paul at the wheel.
Yeah.
He didn't have a seatbelt.
No.
Trevor Rees-Jones sitting next to Henri Paul in the front passenger seat, and he didn't have a seatbelt on.
No, the stories up until very recently were that Trevor Rees-Jones was the only person wearing a seatbelt at the point of impact. He wasn't wearing a seatbelt all the way through the journey. We knew that because that's standard bodyguard procedure anyway. He shouldn't have been wearing a seatbelt. But the stories until recently were that in the last few moments before the crash, he managed to get his seatbelt on, and he was the only one wearing a seatbelt. Thus, he was the only survivor. Mm-hmm. But actually, it's come out in the report again that even Trevor Rees-Jones wasn't wearing a seatbelt. So nobody was wearing a seatbelt in that car.
And you can clearly. Okay, so the only sole survivor. Shall we talk a little bit about Trevor Rees-Jones?
Trevor Rees-Jones.
What's Trevor Rees-Jones' background?
Well, he came from the elite parachute regiment. We know that much, and he joined Mohammed Al Fayed's security staff on leaving the Paras, and he was one of Mohammed Al Fayed's security staff on the night of the crash.
Now the Paras are sort of known as a kind of elite kind
they
of.
They are an elite, one notch below perhaps the SAS.
What do you think's being done with these implants?
I think they've been distributed. I have indications in the military that a lot of our special forces units have been implanted over the last 10 years, if not longer now. And that there are other people that have implanted, such as I mentioned earlier, that we had that lady that had one removed because it was irritating her, and she had her surgeon remove it, and it turned out to be very similar to the technology from 1979 that I had brought to Washington out of Denver.
How did she get it? Does she recall?
How did she doesn't remember. She doesn't remember. She remembers almost as in an alien abduction scenario. She remembers vaguely some missing time back then. Was that there is a secret agreement between us and the Brits that whatever we invent, they get. Whatever they invent, we get. And there is no limitation as to what it is. And somebody needs to look into the influence that certain British commando units have and their cross-pollination with other groups like them in the United States. A lot of our special forces units have been implanted over the last 10 years, if not longer now.
They're the elite of the actual army, yeah, for sure.
Now, is it true that, you know, Trevor Rees-Jones says that he remembers nothing?
Yeah, it's true that he says it. Well, he's had a couple of flashbacks, but it might as well be nothing. He remembers being followed by a motorbike, he said. One or two little bits, but irrelevant, really. He remembers virtually nothing, yeah.
How did she get it? Does she recall?
How did she doesn't remember. She doesn't remember. She remembers almost as in an alien abduction scenario. She remembers vaguely some missing time back then.
Really, he remembers virtually nothing, yeah.
As in an alien abduction scenario, she remembers vaguely some missing time back then.
Once admitted to the hospital, Diana was soon pronounced dead. Then, almost immediately, and against all French laws, a team of embalmers immediately embalmed Diana's body. This makes any post-mortem autopsy difficult to perform. At the same time Diana's body was being illegally embalmed, the tunnel was washed. The scene of the crime was cleansed. The most important body embalmed whilst still warm. Once admitted to the hospital, Diana was soon pronounced dead. Then, almost immediately, and against all French laws, a team of embalmers immediately embalmed Diana's body. This makes any post-mortem autopsy difficult to perform. At the same time Diana's body was being illegally embalmed, the tunnel was washed. The scene of the crime was cleansed. The most important body embalmed whilst still warm.
But what you have to look at is the psychological factors involved, that if they can do one high-profile hit on somebody in a specific way, what it does, it puts the fear of God into those that they want to continue to control, so that they don't say anything out of tune. They don't probe where they shouldn't probe, like Senator Schiff was doing, Congressman Schiff was doing. We've seen in the last 10 years a ramping up, though, if one does even the most cursory research.
Because if they did, they'd have to do to you what they did to Lord Mountbatten.
It's all a mystery to me as to why they have done this. Next, the ongoing Jimmy Savile scandal. Jimmy Savile psyop.
These sciences have been around for decades. They have been ruthlessly kept secret because of the power of a centralized petrodollar oil, gas, coal system. And right now these misanthropic sociopaths are running the planet into the ground. And right now these misanthropic sociopaths are running the planet into the ground. And right now these misanthropic sociopaths are running the planet into the ground. And right now, these misanthropic sociopaths are running the planet into the ground. So we'll be out in the middle of a national park where there's a dead zone, you can't even get cell phone service, and all of a sudden our electronics start lighting up. Guess what? There's a new, just last week, iPhone, iPad app where you can go to the App Store and download all the CSETI CE5 contact protocols, the tones, the meditations, all of that at the App Store. And this is going to go viral. We just announced it. There are a couple hundred people have already gotten it. But this is available now, and it's amazing what it is. It's called the CSETI ET contact app or something. CSETI. So anyone with an iPhone or an iPad, tell them this is available, and you can actually take this. It actually turns your iPhone into a magnetometer. So your iPhone, when an ET craft is materializing or approaching, will have a gauge and a sound that will go off as the ET craft is approaching. This is amazing technology. We've just come out with it in the last week. But the app is there, and the whole training program is at cseti.org and at disclosureproject.org. And what we want to do is have tens of thousands and then millions of people doing this that just overruns the secret government. Because this is what the Army intelligence guys didn't want me to do in 1992. When they saw the contact we had, they said, "What the hell are you doing?" Because they knew we had discovered the Rosetta Stone of contact. And that is all within yourself.
Governments, we've discovered, have not gone far enough. So we've decided that as people, using the CE5 protocols, form our own movement and do what governments have not been doing. We think of this as the People's Disclosure Movement.
And so we feel it's important to create an effort that's a global effort, which this has become.
My name is Mark Benz, and this is Rex, and we're in Bodega, California, and we're doing CE5.
My name is Jeff Bird, and here in Winchester, Virginia, USA, we are doing CE5.
My name is Peggy Brewster, and here in Middleton, United States of America, we are doing CE5.
We have 1,150 teams of CE5 ambassadors, which are spread over 52 countries.
My name is Andre, and here in Sweden, we are doing CE5.
Und wir machen zusammen CE5 in Deutschland.
Here in Burlington, Ontario.
Brisbane, Australia.
From Chester, Virginia.
And Hamilton, Ohio.
We are doing the CE5.
Konnichiwa. Moje ime Daniel.
Daniel tu na Slovensku.
Es Leo Ortiz.
And here in Vancouver, British Columbia.
Faisons du CE5. In CE5.
The CE5 contact estimadas.
CE5.
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 We're doing CE5.
And the reason I think that's so important is that it not only builds the knowledge base, but it also further potentiates this concept of pioneering a new pattern of peaceful contact. And that is something that no other group, large group on Earth is doing. Certainly isn't being done by the State Department and the Senate Foreign Relations Committee.
My name is Andre, and here in Sweden, we are doing CE5.
The problem is not proving that UFOs exist. It's when you begin to expose the energy and propulsion systems behind how they're getting here.
What scientists need to do is they need to look at the hardcore evidence, decide that, oh my gosh, ETs are real, and then get over that. Then you can start extrapolating.
My name is Andre, and here in Sweden, we are doing CE5.
These sciences have been around for decades. They have been ruthlessly kept secret because of the power of a centralized petrodollar oil, gas, coal system. And right now, these misanthropic sociopaths are running the planet into the ground.
Governments have not gone far enough. So we've decided that as people to form our own movement.
All right, game on, roll one.
What we are attempting to achieve is a device which defeats the perpendicular force of gravity.
We have so many modes of converting quantum vacuum energy or zero-point energy.
This possible EVE was found in the Atacama Desert.
We have the best scientists that are going to be doing the DNA testing.
We have 1,150 teams of CE5 ambassadors.
I can attest to the fact that real phenomenon happens here.
And this is probably the most important thing going on this planet today, and yet nobody talks about it.
Después de los años y todo.
If we come together, we can make this happen in a matter of months, not decades. For this is the destiny of humanity.
My name is Andre, and here in Sweden we are doing CE5. My name is Andre, and here in Sweden we are doing CE5.